The Voice 17104.com.
Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to the Richard James Show on 17104, The Voice. Greetings, my friends, and salutations. Another Tuesday has rolled around. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Richard James Show. Today, we want to talk about African Americans in the military. Now, we've had several different shows. We talked about the Tuskegee Airmen. We also talked about the Jacksons, the veterans that are in their families. Seven brothers out of 11 were veterans. But this time, we're going to take a general approach to an overall history of Blacks in the military. And we're going to raise some points, some of them that we've raised before, and then some of them will be brand new. We've had a sordid history. We've had a long history. We've had a history of oppression. We've had a history of being able to be successful in many ways. But the fact of the matter is, come hell or high water, come rain or come shine, we've been there. We were there in the American Revolution. We were there in the War of 1812. We were there in the Second World War. We were there in the First World War. Any conflict that we've had, and at some points, we had to force our way in. We were with General Patton in North Africa. We were with Franklin, no, we were not Franklin, with Theodore Roosevelt in Cuba. The so-called Rough Riders were Black. Many of them were Black. I think it was the 27th Cavalry, better known to you as the Buffalo Soldiers, that fought with him. But let's take a good look at our military history, and then we're going to culminate. We got a video that I think you're going to really like, a couple of videos about the Secretary of Defense, Austin, and I'll tell you a little something about Austin a little later, but the latter part of our show, the Secretary of Defense will be discussing current issues when it comes to the military. He was appointed by President Biden to this very powerful and very important position. And he has some things that you need to hear. There's some major things that are going on. But let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to the beginning when we talk about Blacks in the military. First of all, we know that much of this country was colonized by the British Empire. Now, that's not to say that other countries were not involved and did not have land here, because also France held a major portion of the land here. That's a fact. So did Spain. And then there was conflict between superpowers. And when we take a look at the American Revolution itself, the major European ally that helped us, and by us, I'm talking about the colonies, defeat the Queen, was France. And we have looked at history. We know that Ben Franklin had gone over to France, and so did Thomas Jefferson, as a matter of fact, and negotiated with the French for their support. And they had troops, people don't talk about. They sent their fleet, which people don't talk about. But they fought diligently against the British. And was it because that they wanted us to have our freedom, or was it because of their own particular design? Whatever the reason was, they did it. And they also helped to finance the ultimate and eventually overthrow of the British government here in the United States. That was France. Oh, there's a lot to go. And in terms of what was our role? What was the role of African Americans in this whole thing? Now remember, during the early periods of our history, prior to emancipation, prior to the Declaration of Independence, much of the African American population in this country were what? Slaves. We were slaves to the British, and we were slaves to the French. We were just slaves. That was a fact. So, and some of the battles that we were concerned with and we were involved in, we were supporting our so-called masters. That's true. Some of our masters were patriots. Some of our masters were British. When you talk about or listen, when they say battles began in New England, the name Crispus Attucks comes to mind. Crispus Attucks, first person to die in the Revolutionary War, was an African American. Got shot, killed him. I don't know if that's something to be happy about, but that's just the way it is. In the early days, it was the British. Listen to me. The British who enlisted slaves to fight for them. We didn't have to lobby the British. The British knew the assets of having people of African descent fighting for them. And you know what they did? They offered us freedom. If you fight with us, help us to defeat these rebels. Freedom. Freedom. Dunbar's Raiders was the name of one group of thousands of African soldiers that fought for the British. I know you don't want to hear that. You want to hear that we were patriots. But when we first approached Mr. Washington about fighting on his side, they didn't want us. We don't want any black slaves fighting for us. No, we don't need that. But then when his men began to desert, when it was very difficult for Washington to recruit soldiers to fight for him, who did he reach out to? The brothers, the brothers, the Africans. And another thing he found out with a little training, they were a hell of a group of fighters. Excuse my language, but they could fight. They could and would fight. Particularly as you dangle the carrot in front of them and say, hey, you do this and you have your freedom. Free at last. Free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. So the soldiers, the thousands of them, fought for the British and fought for the Americans. There were other fronts in which we were involved in conflict in this country, other wars. To go into all of them, we need more than 1 hour. Let me just mention the War of 1812. That was another war. I mean, remember, the British actually burnt Washington, D.C.'s White House. We fought and helped in the War of 1812. Do you remember the conflict in Cuba? You remember Theodore Roosevelt? Theodore Roosevelt and his famous Rough Riders? Well, some of those Rough Riders that they talked about were African Americans. 27th Cavalry, better known and identified by Native Americans as the Buffalo Soldiers, fought with Theodore Roosevelt in Cuba. What are some of the other fronts? What are some of the other fronts where African Americans donated their lives and their forces? The Mexican-American War. Now let's just talk a little bit about it. You are probably familiar with a parish in San Antonio, Texas, called the Alamo. The Alamo was a place where some of our patriotic heroes, such as Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett, Sam Houston, some of our distinguished, well-known pioneers took a last stand at the Alamo. Now, what the historians don't tell you is that, first of all, Texas at that time was a part of Mexico. Oh. And Mexico had ruled out slavery. One of the major issues was the preservation of slavery. And that's what some of our heroes were fighting for. Let's look at the whole naked truth. Their economy, in terms of their agricultural economy, crops like cotton, whatever, needed laborers. And it helped if you had free labor. The profits go up. They need laborers, and they wanted to use and continue to use African Americans. And they did not want to abandon the institution of slavery. So the pioneers fought out, and what they tell you is that they were wiped out. And according to historical records, that's what happened. Ultimately, the American government put enough resources into that situation and wind up taking much, if not almost half, of Mexico itself became a part of the United States of America. I'm talking about Arizona. I'm talking about New Mexico. I'm talking about California. All of these lands, and Texas. All of these lands that we now cherish and just consider a part of our beautiful country were a part of Mexico. That's a fact. They were a part of Mexico. President Calvin Coolidge was one, and others fought to take that land, and they did. America began to expand westward. Another big chunk of land that we purchased, supposedly, was the Louisiana Territory, purchased from France. But this country continued to expand and continued to move west and continued to have the issue of slavery. And what do you do with African Americans as a part of it? And when there's military adventures, when there's the military involved, African Americans were there. involved in these battles. And they were very, very much a part of the American situation, even though at some point, and I say it again, they had to fight to get the so-called privilege of dying for this America. Fight to die. Yes, they did. Yes, they did. We're talking about the history of African Americans in the military in this country. And problems continue. It ain't stopped. It happened in the 1700s, happened in the 1800s, and the early 1900s. World War I, our armies were segregated. Soldiers fought, Black soldiers fought in World War I. And when they came home, they were treated like they were less than human beings. That's a fact. Treated like less than human beings. There were race riots that occurred. Yeah. Read your history. Look at some of these documentaries that they have on YouTube that will give you some detailed information on things like what happened in Tulsa, for example. Race riots. Happened in Chester, Pennsylvania, other cities, where Blacks had to fight just to maintain their existence. Happened in World War II. World War II, my daddy was a sailor. My daddy was drafted into the Navy and served during World War II, was stationed in Panama in the West, and in the Panama Canal. My daddy was involved in what I understand, a mutiny. It must have turned out okay because my father, even after the mutiny, he was able to get an honorable discharge. I don't know how he swung that, but he was able to get it done. My brother, Curtis James, served in Vietnam. So we had a lot, and I had cousins that served in both Vietnam and World War II. I never served, thank God for that. So now I'm alive here to talk about it. But no, I never served. I thought about entering into the Air Force, but good friend, almost like a love uncle, was persuaded me not to do that. And instead, I went on to college and got my education rather than sacrifice my life for a cause I didn't know a whole lot about. I was able to do that. Okay, now we're giving you a little bit of brief history. Let me talk to you a little bit about the Secretary of Defense. The Secretary of Defense, an African American by the name of Austin. He has a tremendous record and background. Appointed by Joe Biden, President of the United States. Why is he so special to me? First of all, because he's Secretary of Defense, he's handling that position. But also, he's from a little town, my hometown where I was born, Thomasville, Georgia. Amazing. There was another person of note that we should remember from Thomasville, who was the first African American to graduate from West Point, Flipper. He was from Thomasville, Georgia. Thomasville has produced some very, very distinguished individuals, very, very capable individuals. And these are two. Well, first of all, we're going to do one small video, and then we're going to talk a little bit, and then we're going to bring it back. Secretary of Defense, Austin. that video was a, little different than the one I had in mind, but it gave you some information on uh, some of the current developments in the military. Austin has been quite a successful uh, partner in in this situation, and the way he didn't have experience, he has the experience now, and not only has been very, very successful in his job, and it is successful, and he's still there uh, doing it for us. Uh, we have a situation where we begin to get uh, our people in high levels within the military. Names like General Chappie James, for example, was a very distinguished participant in the military. Davis is another name, and one of the most, if not the most prominent individual that was involved in the military and oversaw military affairs, Colin Powell. And Colin Powell was initially appointed by Ronald Reagan and continued by George Bush Sr. But even as a Republican, he supported programs and individuals who were doing good. As a matter of fact, he came out and nominated and supported Barack Obama for president of the United States. He was a great man. He was he was well loved. As a matter of fact, many individuals wanted him to run for president of the United States. He declined. He decided not to do that. But at any rate, he always was a positive image in the field. Okay, we have another video we want to show. The press conference with Defense Secretary Austin. We have another video.
He was a great patriot who contributed in significant ways to this department, and he will be sorely missed. As you all know, back in March, we delivered our classified national defense strategy to Congress. And since then, the NDS has been the department's North Star as we tackle this century's biggest security challenges. So I am pleased to announce that the department is now publicly releasing our unclassified national defense strategy. And this strategy nests beneath President Biden's national security strategy, which was released earlier this month. I'd like to talk for a few minutes about how the NDS has shaped our work over the past 7 months and how we continue to implement it going forward. The key theme of the NDS is the need to sustain and strengthen U.S. deterrence with the People's Republic of China as our pacing challenge. As the President's national security strategy notes, the PRC is the only competitor out there with both the intent to reshape the international order and increasingly the power to do so. Now, my team and I have been laser focused on this issue since day one, including the China Task Force that I stood up, which produced a range of recommendations to focus the entire department on the China challenge. At the same time, the NDS bluntly describes Russia as an acute threat. And we chose the word acute carefully. Unlike China, Russia can't systemically challenge the United States over the long term. But Russian aggression does pose an immediate and sharp threat to our interests and values. And Putin's reckless war of choice against Ukraine, the worst threat to European security since the end of World War II, has made that very clear for the whole world. Now, the NDS is also clear-eyed about other serious threats, and that includes North Korea's expanding nuclear and missile capabilities. And meanwhile, Iran is moving ahead on its nuclear program, supporting dangerous armed proxies, and even exporting drones that Russia is using to terrorize Ukrainian civilians. And we remain vigilant against the ongoing threat from global terrorist networks, as well as from climate change, pandemics, and other dangers that don't respect borders. So the NDS charges us to defend the U.S. homeland, to deter strategic attacks against the United States and our allies and partners, to prepare to prevail in conflict when necessary, and to build a resilient joint force and defense ecosystem. So we moved out under the NDS in three main ways: forging integrated deterrence, campaigning, and building enduring advantages. These three avenues inform all of our operations, activities, and investments. We're strengthening a 21st century combat-credible U.S. military that will deter aggression that threatens the interests of the United States or our allies and partners. And that means a military ready to tackle the full range of threats out there, harnessing the American spirit of innovation to meet the complexities of today's world. First, we're seamlessly integrating our deterrence efforts to make a basic truth crystal clear to any potential foe. And that truth is that the cost of aggression against the United States or our allies and partners far outweigh any conceivable gains. So we're aligning the department's operations, activities, and investments across all theaters, across the full spectrum of conflict, and across all domains, especially in space and cyberspace. In space, we're working to field resilient satellite constellations to dissuade any adversary from testing our will and to ensure that we will prevail if they try. In the cyber realm, we're boosting our resilience and enhancing our capabilities to conduct military operations. And meanwhile, our nuclear capabilities remain the ultimate backstop for our strategic deterrence. And that's why we're fully committed to modernizing all three legs of our nuclear triad. Now let me note here that this is the first time in the department's history that we conducted all of our major strategic reviews together. And that means the NDS, the Nuclear Posture Review, and the Missile Defense Review. The Nuclear Posture Review reaffirms that as long as nuclear weapons exist, the fundamental role of U.S. nuclear weapons is to deter nuclear attack on the United States, our allies, and our partners. Meanwhile, the Missile Defense Review underscores that missile defense contributes to integrated deterrence by undermining a potential foe's confidence in its ability to mount a successful attack. And so by weaving these documents together, we help ensure that the entire department is moving forward together in matching our resources to our goals. Now, the strength and combat credibility of the Joint Force remains central to integrated deterrence. And that's why our fiscal year 23 budget request included more than $56 billion for air power platforms and systems, and more than $40 billion to maintain our dominance at sea, and almost $13 billion to support and modernize our forces on land, and some $34 billion to sustain and modernize our nuclear forces. But integrated deterrence isn't just about the steps that we take on our own. It also means working even more closely with our unparalleled network of allies and partners to deter aggression in region after region. In the Indo-Pacific, you see the power of partnership with the historic AUKUS agreement, with our trilateral cooperation with Japan and Korea, and with our many multinational exercises to increase readiness and interoperability. In Europe, you see it with a united and resolute NATO, and with the extraordinary coordination of some 50 members of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group that we created to stand up for Ukraine's self-defense. And in the Middle East and Africa, and Latin America. You see it in our efforts to bolster our allies and partners and improve interoperability and integration wherever possible. Second, the NDS emphasizes the day-to-day work of campaigning. And that means conducting and sequencing military activities that over time shift the security environment in our favor. And it means working to limit and disrupt malign activities by our competitors. So we're building and exercising the forces that we'll need in a crisis or a conflict, including requesting $135 billion in last year's budget to further invest in our readiness. We've updated our posture in the Indo-Pacific to make it more survivable against aggression. And with AUKUS, we're putting campaigning into action by linking our cutting-edge capabilities with robust military exercises alongside our allies. And third, we're building enduring advantages to further strengthen the foundations of the defense enterprise. And innovation is central here. Last year, for instance, we established the Rapid Defense Experimentation Reserve, which funds different parts of the department to work together to fill critical joint warfighting gaps. And our fiscal year 23 budget request included more than $130 billion for research, development, testing, and evaluation. Now that's the largest R&D budget number in DoD history. We're also working in new ways with our industry partners, including by strengthening our supply chains in our defense industrial base. The department is also tackling the dangers of climate change, including ensuring that our military can continue to operate superbly in hotter and harsher environments. And above all, the NDS demands even deeper investments in our people. They will always be this department's most valuable resource and the bedrock of American security. And that's why the President's budget includes a 4.6% pay raise for service members starting January 1st, 2023. And that's why I've recently directed the department to ease the strains that can come along with service. And that includes making it easier to secure housing and to move to new duty stations, to get superb child care, and to help military spouses advance their own exceptional careers. You know, our outstanding service members and their families do everything that we ask of them and more. Doing right by them is a national security imperative, and it's a sacred trust. So we're looking forward to working with Congress to secure on-time appropriations, to finalize this year's National Defense Authorization Act, and to continue to implement this strategy. And as the President has said, we will not leave our future vulnerable to the whims of those who do not share our vision for a world that is free, open, prosperous, and secure. And we're confident that we've got the right defense strategy to tackle the challenges ahead, and to defend the American people, and to strengthen our outstanding all-volunteer force, and to safeguard the democratic values that are the soul of America. Thank you, and I'll be glad to take a couple of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Go ahead and start with Associated Press.
Mr. Secretary, as Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues and it sustains continued conventional losses, are you becoming more concerned that it might be likelier to resort to a tactical nuclear weapon, as Putin has suggested? And secondly, how can the U.S. in kind of this new security construct prevent nuclear conflict from escalating, prevent Russia from using a tactical nuclear weapon, while, as your own strategy said, also possibly deter China from its own nuclear ambitions?
So are we concerned about escalation? We are certainly concerned about escalation. We have been so from the very beginning of this conflict. And that's why we believe that it's important to communicate with our allies and partners, and also with our adversaries. And as long as we have the channels of communication open, and we're able to communicate, what's important to us. And I think we have an opportunity to manage escalation. So that concern's been there from the very beginning, and will remain cited on this going forward.
So does the introduction of potentially using a tactical nuke enter a new era of nuclear deterrence?
Well, I mean, it would be the first time that a nuclear weapon has been used in over 70 years, so that certainly has the potential of changing things in the international community. So this is the thing that I think if this happened, we have been very clear from the very beginning that you would see a very significant response from the international community. So this is important to the world, and again, we remain focused on making sure that we're going to do everything that we can help Ukraine to defend its sovereign territory, and we're going to continue to communicate that any type of use of a weapon of that sort, or even the talk of the use of a weapon of that sort, is dangerous and irresponsible. So.
Let's go ahead and go to Jen Griffin.
Secretary Austin, Vladimir Putin again said today that Ukraine is planning to use a dirty bomb. Is Putin bluffing? And how does scrapping one of the few tactical nukes that was in development here in the Pentagon deter Putin right now?
We have not seen anything to indicate that Putin has made a decision to use a dirty bomb. Nor have we seen any indications that the Ukrainians are planning such a thing. Ukrainians, in fact, their leadership have indicated to us that that's not in their plans. So, again, we've seen no indications of that. It's important to make sure that we're talking to adversaries and allies alike, and making sure that we're tamping down dangerous talk and making sure that we maintain lines of communication. So, open.
Scrapping the tactical nuke, the sea-based launch missile. Why do that now? Isn't that sending a dangerous message when you're trying to deter Putin and China?
Jen, as you know, we have our inventory of nuclear weapons is significant, and so we determined as we looked at our inventory that we did not need that capability. We have a lot of capability in our nuclear inventory, and I don't think this sends any message to Putin. He understands what our capability is, and so we'll continue to move forward.
Let's go ahead and go to Tom Boone.
Mr. Secretary, you've said repeatedly, and others in the administration have, and also in NATO, that it's up to Ukraine to determine how the war ends. It's their country. Now, President Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials have said they aim to push all the Russians out of Ukraine, not only in the east and the south, but Crimea as well. Now, you talk to Ukrainian officials repeatedly. You're an expert on ground warfare as a retired four-star. Is it realistic to think that Ukraine can push all Russian soldiers out of the entire country, including Crimea?
Well, Tom, that's when you think about where Ukraine is today. There are not many people in the world who thought that they would be in this place because if you look at the capability that Russia has, arrayed against initially what the Ukrainians had, most people thought it was not possible to be where we are today. So, in terms of speculating on what the Ukrainians are capable of, I think I wouldn't want to speculate on that. I think they have exceeded most people's expectations, and they've done that because we in the international community have really worked hard and been moved very quickly to provide them with the capability that they need to defend their sovereign territory, and they have employed it very, very well. In terms of their objectives, Tom, Ukrainians must outline their objectives. We won't do that for them. And again, they are fighting for the defense fighting to defend their sovereign territory, and we're going to continue to support them for as long as it takes.
Yeah, but again, we keep asking you this, the long-range missile systems, the ATACMS, they still want those, you're unwilling to give them those. Will that change now that Russia is basically taking out their entire grid system?
Tom, it's, the Ukrainians can service just about every target that they want to service using the GMLRS missiles that they've been employing. And so they have what they need to be successful. They're putting it to good use. And so we're going to continue to do those things that are working for us on the battlefield, working for the Ukrainians on the battlefield. Right now, what they need more than anything else, Tom, as you know, is air defense capability. And so as we had our last Ukraine Defense Contact Group meeting, we really emphasized this, and some of the countries have stepped up right away and provided capability. We have been pressing hard to get them a NASAMS capability, and we expect that in the next, early next month, we'll be able to get the capability and train troops married up there in Ukraine. No announcements to make here today, but we're pressing hard to get that capability in. We saw Spain step forward and provide Hawk anti-aircraft capability, or air defense capability, excuse me. And that was commendable. We now have to get the troops trained on the Hawk system, and we're working on that. And we continue to press to make sure that where possible, countries provide as much capability in terms of air defense as quickly as they can to support Ukraine.
Okay, give it to Megan, Military Times.
What changes does this NDS call for in terms of force structure, either manpower levels overall or where they're postured around the world, where troops need to be around the world, whether that's increasing or stabilizing this 100,000 number in Europe, something like that? And what are your concerns about the recruiting environment and being able to meet those needs going forward?
I'm confident that we'll have the force, Megan, to execute our strategy. And in terms of our force posture, we went through a force posture review very early on. There were incremental adjustments from time to time to that force posture laydown that we provided. And again, we have the ability to rapidly deploy capability to Europe. And you saw that exercised at the very beginning of this conflict as we deployed forces from heavy forces, armored forces from the United States to Europe very, very quickly. We could do that because of the things that we've done with the European Defense Initiative. And we established pre-positioned equipment sites that troops could fall in on very quickly. And so those things have worked out very, very well for us. We're confident that that we have the force to be able to execute our strategy. And in terms of recruiting, we continue to focus on this issue. This is a priority for me. It's also a priority for all of our service leaders. And so we continue to invest in those things that that will allow us to recruit the best talent that's out there to man this incredible force. So.
Time for one more. Go to Eric Schmidt, New York Times.
Secretary said that if Vladimir Putin used a tactical weapon, nuclear weapon, there would be a very significant response from the international community. In your professional opinion, would a military response by the United States be a prudent action, or would that only continue the climb of this ladder of escalation?
Well, Eric, I won't get into any potential responses here. I'm the guy that makes the recommendation to my boss on what we should do and how we should do it. And so I'll make sure that he has credible responses that are actually effective in terms of what we want to do, and as we always have. And so I'll just leave it at that.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have available for us today. Secretary Austin, thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, I guess that's the end of the video. You heard the Secretary of Defense outlining policy and an approach to the situation in Ukraine. Very articulate gentleman, very knowledgeable gentleman, and really doing a job in presenting information to the public. Hailing from my hometown of Thomasville, Georgia, we have had some very distinguished individuals that come out of this little place. It's a little small. I'm not sure what the population is. Maybe 23,000, 30,000. That's just a, that's just a guess. Well known for its plantations and that kind of thing. But they've also had some very, very distinguished people come out of that little town. Must be a great educational system. Wonderful place, wonderful place. As a matter of fact, I have a cousin by the name of James Jack Hadley has developed an African American museum. In fact, we had it on the air. Beautiful museum. What they did is they purchased the what was the black high school, the Frederick Douglass High School, and converted the main campus into a museum, a historical museum. And it's just so important to preserve information. And one very, very important part of our history is the military. It's a shame that mankind feels that it has to kill each other and to have wars in order to settle disputes. It's just a terrible, terrible thing. But there was a saying that the Panthers used to have: arm yourself or you'll harm yourself. In a situation when others are armed, when attacks are being made, it's really critically important to have that training and to be able to withstand subjugation, to withstand slavery. And in order to do that, our people of African descent have had to participate in this. I mentioned before that two members of my family, my brother Curtis James, was in the United States Army during the Vietnam era, and my father, Richard C. James II, was in the United States Navy, and he served, and then he was located at the Panama Canal, and then was honorably discharged from the Navy in World War II. Then after that, during the period of time when my father served, and we'll say it again, the armed forces were segregated, and there were black units that were in the service that served under white officers. But Harry S. Truman, who became president of the United States, desegregated the armed service and opened up opportunities for individuals of African American descent to be able to excel and do well. We had great men that came out of that changed the strategy. General Davis was one. General Chappie James was another. Many of them that came out of the desegregation of the armed forces by Harry S. Truman. And you would have think that the great President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was named for, who was well known for the social services aspects of things he did, like creating Social Security. I mean, he did some great things, public housing, some great things. He led us in the World War II adventure. You would think that he would have desegregated the service, but he did not. All political. And sometimes the politics leans to the left, sometimes the politics lean to the right. It was not a good thing, not a good thing at all. But we have a gentleman, Secretary Austin, who's a brilliant man, intelligent man, who was doing a fantastic job in representing our nation and working in harmony with Joe Biden. That's the one thing I'll say about Joe. Joe has no problems in appointing people of color who have the skills to do it. As a matter of fact, some of his appointments have exceeded the number of appointments that my President Obama did. he exceeded. He hasn't been afraid to take a stand. He wasn't afraid, for example, to choose an African American female to run as vice president. He has done some things. He really, really has done some and broke some barriers. He gutsy individual. He's a tough individual. He sees the path that needs to be taken, and he takes that path and he does it, and he gets things done. So we're looking at history of African Americans' involvement in the military in this country. And every major engagement, the French and Indian Wars, the War of 1812, the war in Cuba, the Mexican-American War, World War I, World War II, and other engagements, African Americans have participated, have served well, and have done what needed to be done. And this country owes African Americans, and I'm going to say very, very clearly, reparation for the tremendous harm that it has done to an entire race. I'll say it again. Reparation is due. Also, reparation in terms of stopping some of the current and present systemic discrimination and racism that takes place. Pull it out. There's still areas where African American or people of color have a very difficult time getting loans for businesses, for example, getting the kind of money, segregated housing, areas that you have a difficult time getting into. Even in the whole housing market, getting an appraisal that is fair and just. A part of that appraisal has to do with what's the color of the people that live in that particular house. We had that problem here. We tried to get our home appraised, and we were like $100,000 less in terms of what they came out in terms of the value of the home, simply because they're Black. So racism still runs rampant in this country. And I'm sure the military is not exempt. We've got to do the right thing in this country. God knows we have to do the right thing. We have a whole problem in terms of how we implement policy. We have some wonderful police officers, very credible police officers, and then we have some police officers that need some help. We have too many deaths at the hands of violent, racist police. And then again, that puts a black eye on those officers that are not racist, that are good, that do their job well. And I want to say that you just can't, throw a ball at one and not talk about the good that the other has done. Some have done some beautiful jobs. Friends that I know care about people, that care about their job, that are total professionals. They receive a black eye because of other individuals and the things that they have done wrong. It's really terrible. Well, we're coming down near the end of the program. And I want to tell you that we're still in the business of being in the business. And we love your friendship. We appreciate those friends that come by, but we want you to come by and help us to stay in business. Here's a picture. You can see we have the tall giraffes, we have the oars, we have original paintings from Guinea-Bissau. We have some of the most colorful and beautiful masks that you want to see. We have statues that are authentic, that are from Africa. We have soapstone statues that are created and by people who are artists or artisans who may not have a degree, but they have the skills to be able to develop this kind of thing. And we have African clothing. We have all kinds of clothing. This dashiki I have on now is one that we sell. So come on down and see us. We love to hear from you also. Continue to support 17104 because they're doing a tremendous job. And so we want to say to you, thank you for tuning in today. Look forward to seeing you next week. We have some interesting shows that will be coming up. We're gonna have another part that we're gonna do with the Jackson family. That's gonna be soon. Really fascinating group of individuals. So we have other things and other topics. We've done shows on the Native Americans. We had Ted Reed, James Theodore Reed came on and did a marvelous job. And so anyway, thank you again. God bless you. And may heaven smile upon you. This is Richard James signing off, saying so long until we see you next week. Take care.
Thank you again for tuning in to the Richard James Show. Our African and our African American programs are set up to educate you on what's going on in this world. And thank you for taking out the time to listen. Let us hear from you sometime also. So this is your neighbor and your friend signing off. Until I see you again next week and hear from you again next week. So long. God bless.